Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rank and File Sports. And today we're going to be hopping right back into our series where we are predicting every single Power 4 team's record by the start of the college football season. And today's the number 21 team in the Rank and File poll, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, Iowa is known for their defense, and they are also known for being terrible on offense. Um, Honestly, I think this is going to be pretty much a lot of the same this year. Hawkeyes are going to be good, but you can definitely bet the under. Taking a look at the schedule, Iowa starts off with a very easy matchup against Illinois State. This one shouldn't be a very difficult game. I highly doubt Illinois State is able to score more than 3 points in this one. Be very low scoring, typical to Iowa. I'm sure all of their games are going to be very similar. They won't blow anybody out, but Iowa will be in control this entire game. Next one's a rivalry against Iowa State. This game happens every year. It's at home for the Hawkeyes this year, so they'll definitely give them a little bit of an advantage there. Troy shouldn't be too big of an issue for Iowa either. And then a road trip to Minnesota could be interesting, but I don't think Minnesota is going to be very good this year. Now, the road trip to Ohio State, that is going to be an extremely difficult game. Don't really see Iowa winning that one. The Buckeyes are too good on offense and defense. Hawkeyes probably won't score, and there's just no way they're going to be able to stop the Buckeye offense. So I do like Ohio State in that one. Home game against Washington also going to be difficult. Washington's not nearly as good as they were last year. They're not going to be winning a national championship or even competing for one, but they're still a good team. They brought in Jedd Fisch to coach them from Arizona, so definitely still some pull there. But I just don't think they're going to be, or I think it's going to be a really interesting game, especially at home for Iowa. The road trip to Michigan State also just not really that impressive. They could be okay this year, but they're not going to be much at a much higher level than just an average bowl team if they even make that. Northwestern's terrible. Iowa's just not going to lose this game. Northwestern is, they don't even have a stadium. They're really not a very good team this year. Home game against Wisconsin, also going to be interesting. I think Wisconsin's not a bad team this year. They might be a little bit underrated. Unfortunately for them, I think the Big Ten is a little bit too top heavy for them to maybe sneak into an at large playoff bid. But I do think Wisconsin's a good team. Road trip to UCLA, joining the conference this year. UCLA's all right, but this will be an interesting game. It's a far trip for Iowa, so going to be really tough to tell what happens there. They got one more bye week before the road trip to Maryland and the home game against Nebraska to finish it out. Like all Iowa games, these are both going to be very low scoring. Towards the end of the season, it gets a little bit harder to predict Iowa also. They tend to lose random games that they kind of shouldn't. And a lot of that's just due to the fact that they can't score points. So those two are going to be very difficult to predict. Overall, they have 7 home games and 5 away games. Only 2 opponents in the rank and file top 25, Ohio State and Wisconsin, and an overall schedule difficulty of 4 out of 10.
Checking out the guaranteed wins for these Iowa Hawkeyes, we start off with Illinois State. This one's pretty self explanatory in our eyes. Uh, this is an FCS opponent against a great defense in Iowa, so we don't think the Hawkeyes will have too much of a problem with this one. As for Troy, the sentiment is similar, but uh, this game will definitely be closer than a lot of people expect it to be since it's early, and we'll all forget that Iowa doesn't have an offense. So this game is probably going to be 24-14 or something of that nature in favor of the Hawkeyes, but the outcome will never be in doubt. Moving on to the likely wins for this team, we have Iowa State, Minnesota, Michigan State, Northwestern, UCLA, and Maryland. Um, Iowa State, big rivalry game, will probably be a close game, but we have the Hawkeyes winning because they're just so dominant on defense. The offense will still be mediocre at best, but it will be improved now that they have a new offensive coordinator. So we're going to lean on that knowledge to give the Hawkeyes the advantage in this one. As for Minnesota, think of the Gophers like in Iowa, but just not as good. They play good defense, very solid line play, but their offense is just not good. Um, and when you're matched up against a Kirk Ferentz team, you know that you're not going to be as disciplined and as fundamentally sound as they are. So we can't give the Gophers the advantage in this one. As for Michigan State and UCLA, both teams are going to have a really hard time this year in the Big Ten, especially UCLA. Both teams are rebuilding. Um, both teams are in talent-rich states as far as recruiting is concerned. So eventually they'll be back into the upper middle of the pack in the Big Ten, but this year is just not that year for these teams. So that's why we have Iowa winning this game, even though ordinarily we probably wouldn't under normal circumstances. As for Northwestern, they shocked the world last year um, by winning 8 games and a bowl against Utah, but we expect them to take a step back. They'll be pretty decent on defense. The offense will be all right. Just classic Northwestern football. Not great at any given thing, but just overall solid. And that's Iowa to a T, and Iowa generally does it better. And Iowa's just a more stable program at the moment, so we got to give the advantage to the Hawkeyes. As for Maryland, Taulia Tagovailoa is no longer the quarterback for the Terrapins. So knowing that and Maryland's tendency to be a very streaky team, last year they started 5-0, but finished the season with a whimper. So you never really know what you're getting with them, and that's never a good recipe when you're going up against the Hawkeyes. We're pretty confident that Iowa's going to come away with the win in this one.
Moving on to the toss-ups for Iowa, we've got a grand total of 3 of them, with the first one being that home game against Washington on October 12th. And the main reason we got to put this one in the toss-ups is just because Washington is going to have a better offense than Iowa. That's just a fact. And honestly, same can probably be said for these other 2 schools. Iowa probably has the best defense, but if they can't stop them all but like 2 times, then Iowa's probably not going to be able to score enough points in order to win these games. So these are all going to be very close games, very low scoring. But I think the reason all of 3 of these teams are on here, Washington at home, Wisconsin at home, and Nebraska also at home, is because these 3 teams have the offensive capabilities to score on the Iowa defense maybe just enough times to win all of these matchups on the road. So I think these are definitely games Iowa can win, but they're going to have to score points to do it, and that's not a guarantee, which is why we have to put these in the toss-up category.
As for the guaranteed loss for Iowa this year, there's only one of them. To us, it's Ohio State. We think Ohio State is one of the best teams, if not the best team in college football this year. To us, the only other team that we think there is an argument to be number 1 over Ohio State is Georgia, and Iowa just does not have the talent. They don't have the offensive firepower. We think this game's going to be over pretty quickly. Ohio State's offense is going to be really good this year. They won't be one-dimensional. Their run game is probably going to be the best in college football, with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in the backfield, and having a quarterback in Will Howard with experience, as well as an always stout receiving core. We just think Ohio State's talent is going to be way too much for Iowa to be able to overcome.
Taking a look at the schedule recap, I do think Iowa's able to start out the season with 4 straight wins. I like them to win the Iowa State and Minnesota games pretty close. Those will both be low scoring, as all Iowa games are. But I like the Hawkeyes to start out 4-0 going into that matchup at Ohio State. That one, they're just not going to win. Let's be realistic. I just don't think Iowa's nearly good enough to win on the road at Ohio State. And then the game at home against Washington, I think Iowa might be slight favorites, but I do like Washington in that one. So I am going to go ahead and take the Huskies on the road. I think their offense is going to be enough to score on the road. Next two games, Michigan State and Northwestern, should be pretty solid for Iowa. The road trip to Michigan State, they might lose just because that's kind of something they do, is just randomly drop a game that they shouldn't lose. I like the matchup at home against Wisconsin. For some reason, Iowa and Wisconsin just combined for the lowest scoring games of the year. This could be 7-3. Iowa could win this one 6-3. But I like Iowa scoring very few points and giving up just a little bit less to Wisconsin. This is going to be a very low scoring game. And I like the Hawkeyes in this one. Road trip to UCLA, like I said, long road trip. I just don't think UCLA is that great this year. So I do like Iowa on the road there. Same goes for Maryland, not as far away from home. Still a decent flight, but I like the Hawkeyes on the road there. And then finally, we got Nebraska at home. I am going to take the Huskers here. I think last game of the season, it's going to be kind of tricky. They played a close game last year, if any of you watched that one. And Nebraska, I do think, is able to win it this year. As you can see, 60% for Iowa. I think the Hawkeyes are going to be favored at home. I do think they drop this game. I like Iowa finishing at 9-3. Projected record sitting at 8.4 and 3.6. So it's kind of favoring towards another loss somewhere. I could see them maybe losing to Iowa State or maybe one of the other road matchups. Also, that game against Wisconsin at home, really low scoring. Who knows? Maybe they get a touchdown at the end, and that's enough to push them over. FPI's got the Hawkeyes sitting at 7-5, so they're like two more losses on here than we do. I think 7-5 is probably the floor for Iowa this year. I don't really see them finishing below that. They have a 7.4% chance to make the playoffs and a 0.1% chance to win the national championship. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video tomorrow.